Hi everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Imagine telling someone just 10 years ago that a reality TV personality could become one of the strongest mayoral candidates in Los Angeles, a city where Republicans are so outnumbered that most GOP candidates never even have a realistic chance of winning. Most people would have laughed at the idea. Los Angeles has long been considered one of America's safest Democratic strongholds. Republican registration hovers around 15%, and for decades the city's politics have been dominated by one party. Yet this year, for several days after Election Day, reality television star Spencer Pratt found himself sitting in second place as votes were counted. For a while, it looked entirely possible that he could advance to the final runoff for mayor. Although he was later eliminated and missed out on the November general election, it was almost beside the point. The real story isn't whether Spencer Pratt becomes mayor. The real story is why someone like Spencer Pratt was able to get that close in the first place. And I think that question tells us something much bigger about the future of American politics. Because what we're witnessing isn't simply the rise of celebrity politicians, it's the rise of something even more powerful. It's the rise of attention as political capital. For most of modern American history, there was a fairly predictable path into politics. You started small. Maybe you ran for city council, then the state legislature, maybe Congress. Along the way, you built relationships inside your party, raised money, learned policy, hired experienced campaign staff, and slowly climbed the political ladder. That system still exists, but it no longer has a monopoly. Today, someone can build an audience on YouTube, start a successful podcast, become popular on X, dominate TikTok, or spend years on television, and suddenly possess something that traditional politicians spent decades trying to build: public attention. Notice I didn't say public trust. I didn't say governing experience. I said attention, because attention has become the entrance ticket into modern politics. That doesn't mean attention automatically wins elections. It doesn't. But it dramatically increases your chances of getting into the conversation. And that's a huge change. Donald Trump understood this before almost anyone else in politics. Many of his critics still insist that he won simply because he was famous. I don't think that's true. His fame opened the door. His message walked him through it. Millions of Americans already knew who Trump was before he announced his campaign in 2015. But simply being famous isn't enough to become president. America has plenty of famous actors, musicians, athletes, and television personalities who never seriously considered running for office. What made Trump different wasn't just celebrity status. It was his ability to dominate the national conversation almost every single day. Whether people loved him or hated him, they were talking about him. He understood that controlling the news cycle often meant controlling the political conversation. That's a very different skill than simply having experience inside Washington. And today, that same dynamic is spreading far beyond presidential politics. Spencer Pratt isn't becoming a serious candidate because Americans suddenly decided reality TV stars make the best mayors. He's attracting attention because many voters believe he's talking about problems that professional politicians either ignore or explain away. Los Angeles has spent years struggling with homelessness. Residents have watched entire neighborhoods transformed by sprawling encampments. Wildfires have devastated communities. Crime remains a constant concern for many families. Infrastructure problems continue to frustrate taxpayers. Whether every criticism is fair isn't really the point. Politics has always been driven as much by perception as by statistics. When voters feel their city is deteriorating while government officials insist everything is improving, frustration begins to build. Candidates who acknowledge that frustration often gain credibility simply because they sound like they're describing the same reality voters see every day. That's something traditional politicians sometimes underestimate. People don't necessarily expect perfection from their leaders, but they do expect honesty. They want leaders who appear to recognize the problems they're living with. That's part of why authenticity has become such a valuable political asset. Now, authenticity itself can be manufactured. Campaign consultants know that. Media professionals know that. But voters have become remarkably good at distinguishing between someone reading carefully tested talking points and someone speaking naturally, even if they disagree with that person's conclusions. That's one reason why podcast interviews have become so influential. Unlike television appearances, where candidates answer questions for 5 minutes before moving on, podcasts often last 2 or 3 hours. Listeners feel like they actually know the person. That creates something traditional political advertising struggles to replicate: connection. And once that connection exists, attention becomes even more valuable. This is why I think the phrase celebrity politics actually misses what's happening. Celebrity alone isn't enough. Media influence is. Think about some of the biggest political voices in America today. Many of them don't hold elected office. Some never have. Yet millions of Americans hear from them every week. Podcast hosts, independent journalists, YouTubers, commentators, social media creators. Some people spend more time listening to these voices than they spend watching traditional news. That's a profound shift. For generations, politicians depended on media organizations to communicate with voters. Today, many political figures own their own media platforms. That completely changes the balance of power. Instead of asking television networks for airtime, they already have audiences waiting every morning. That's why I think future political outsiders won't necessarily emerge from Hollywood. They'll emerge from media. Maybe that's television. Maybe that's podcasting. Maybe it's YouTube. Maybe it's a platform that doesn't even exist yet. The important point is this: the next major political figure doesn't need permission from party leaders to build a following anymore. They can build one themselves. Now, some commentators have argued that this trend mainly benefits Republicans. I'm not entirely convinced. It's certainly true that Republicans have produced some of the most successful political outsiders in recent history. Ronald Reagan came from Hollywood. Donald Trump came from business and television. Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California after a career in entertainment. Those examples are real. But I don't think this is something unique to the Republican Party. The Democratic Party has also seen outsiders rise rapidly. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez became one of the most recognizable politicians in America only a short time after entering Congress. Her ability to command attention often exceeds that of politicians who have spent decades in Washington. That's not because she has more seniority. It's because she understands modern communication. So, I don't believe either party is immune from these changes. The bigger question is which party adapts faster. Some observers argue Democrats struggle because their internal political structure is more protective of established leaders. Others argue Republicans are simply more willing to embrace unconventional candidates. There may be some truth in both arguments. But I think another explanation deserves more attention. Many celebrities simply don't want to become politicians. Imagine giving up privacy, enduring years of investigations, constant media scrutiny, endless fundraising, and having every decision dissected by millions of strangers. That's not an attractive career move for most successful entertainers. It's one thing to endorse a candidate. It's another thing entirely to become one. So I wouldn't assume that Hollywood's biggest names secretly want to run for president. Most probably don't. At the same time, traditional political experience still matters. This is where I think some people go too far. Every election cycle produces predictions that political experience no longer matters. History doesn't really support that conclusion. Attention can get you into the race. It cannot automatically help you govern. Running a city isn't the same as running a podcast. Managing a state budget isn't the same as producing viral content. Negotiating legislation requires skills that social media alone cannot provide. Eventually, every outsider faces the same test. Can they turn popularity into effective leadership? Some succeed. Others don't. Voters eventually notice the difference. That's why I don't believe attention has replaced competence. I think attention has simply become the fastest path to earning an opportunity to prove your competence. Those are very different things. Looking ahead to 2028, many political analysts are already trying to predict who might emerge as the next major Republican or Democratic figure. Personally, I think those conversations often focus too much on individual names. Whether it's J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Gavin Newsom, or someone else, the more interesting question isn't who wins. It's what kind of person is now capable of competing. 20 years ago, serious presidential contenders almost always came from the Senate, a governor's mansion, or the vice presidency. Today, that assumption feels much less certain. The next major candidate could very well come from outside the traditional political establishment, not because celebrity itself has become more important, but because building a national audience has become dramatically easier than it was a generation ago. For decades, political power created public attention. Now we're entering an era in which public attention increasingly creates political power. That may be one of the most important transformations in modern American democracy. So whether Spencer Pratt ultimately becomes mayor of Los Angeles isn't really the headline. The headline is that his campaign reminds us how quickly the rules of politics are changing. Traditional political experience still matters. Strong policies still matter. Good leadership still matters. But none of those things guarantee that people will actually hear your message. In today's America, before you can persuade voters, you first have to capture their attention. And in an age where millions of Americans get their news from podcasts, YouTube channels, independent creators, and social media instead of the evening news, attention has become one of the most valuable currencies in politics. The politicians who understand that reality will shape the next generation of American leadership. Those who don't may discover that experience alone is no longer enough. Thanks for watching.